Hi, class. This is going to be a lecture on the peopling of North America. In this lecture, we're going to be tying in the previous lecture that we talked about with the environment of California, comparing it then, about 20, 30,000 years ago, to now. This is going to take care of the then aspect, the past. We're going to be looking specifically at what the environment was like when people came to North America, how they came to North America, when, where, who were these people. And ultimately, these questions are still hotly debated among archaeologists. And California is really centered around these debates, given its geographical location. So we're going to follow up with a video as well with an online assignment. And then when I get back, we're also going to be talking about the first Californians. But for right now, we have to take a much broader approach. So before we look directly at California's prehistory, we need to understand how people came to the New World, so to speak, to North America and South America. And in order to do that, we have to ask some vital questions. First of all, who were these people? Um, when did they come here? How did they travel, and why? And where did they move from and to? So we're asking the really critical questions: who, when, how, and where. And ultimately, archaeologists also ask the question why, try to explain human behavior. So we're going to get into a lot of this today. This shouldn't be the longest lecture. Make sure that you're staying up to date on your readings. Some of this will be in the reading, some of it won't be. So if you have any questions, we can talk about them on February 12th when I'm back. So basically, over the past 40 years, archaeology has been grappling with these issues, and as we get more and more archaeological evidence, as technology becomes better and we start refining the methods that we're using in archaeology, we can better understand these previous four questions that are up here. And so it's basically it's come down to archaeologists and paleontologists and working with native groups to try to understand what the past looked like during the Ice Age, and then leading right up into the late Pleistocene era. So the first question is who? And in order to understand who the first Californians were, we must look at settlement from a much broader perspective. We need to look at basic human movement and migration. And so we're going to start on the global level. Um, Fossil evidence of human migration starts with ancestors of Homo sapiens, early hominids, first appearing several million years ago. And we have Homo erectus, 1.8 million to 143,000 years ago. Homo sapiens neanderthalensis, 600,000 years ago to 350,000 years ago. And Homo sapiens, 195,000 years ago. Sorry, that last part's a little bit cut off. And so the question then becomes, were all of these present in North and South America when the people first, did all three of these? Was it Homo erectus that then evolved to Homo sapiens neanderthalensis that then evolved to anatomically modern humans? And the question is, by looking through archaeology, um, we tend to see that the physical anthropologists are saying that the first settlers of the New World were Homo sapiens, anatomically modern humans. They had the same cognitive functions, the same physical characteristics that we do today. So then we have to start understanding human movement in general. Why did they come here? And we can start understanding that basically they developed independently in the Old World, migrated to the New World as anatomically modern humans. About 90,000 years ago, moved out of Africa. About 60,000 years ago, moved across Europe, across Eurasia. 50,000 years ago into Australia. And then from 40 to 27,000 years ago, moved from parts of Asia up into Siberia and across into North America. But that's still a very broad uh, definition of who they're Homo sapiens. Well, yeah, that's fine, but the question still remains. Studies in physical anthropology have examined certain blood types, certain blood groups, as well as mitochondrial DNA from living groups, different races, ethnicities throughout the world, focusing on indigenous groups specifically. And when we break it down, first we'll look at the study showing the ABO blood groups. When you look at blood types, you start seeing similarities in the distribution of certain indigenous ethnicities throughout North and South America. And when you compare these indigenous groups with that of Asian subgroups, when you compare the blood groups, those most similar worldwide, those most similar to Native North Americans are of Asian ethnicity, meaning that they share common ancestors. That you can look at the migration and understand that the closest descendants are from Asian ethnicity. Likewise, when you're looking at mitochondrial DNA, it shows a strong correlation between Siberian subgroups, such as Inuit tribes, and those of Mongol descent from Northeast Asia. And so there's this very strong correlation, first between the Asian populations and the Siberian populations, and then the Siberian populations and the North American native groups. So once again, it's this continuing movement, this continuing migration from Asia up through Siberia down into North America. So we have two different types of evidence, both the mitochondrial DNA and the ABO blood groups, that really support this, and we can have a better understanding that yes, indeed, these are modern Homo sapiens coming from Asia into the Americas. So that's what we can say so far. The basic summary is that these groups are modern, anatomically modern Homo sapiens coming into North America. However, there's still a lot of controversies. Um, there have been some remains that have some predominant features of Neanderthal features. However, that's evidence is very scant in that neighborhood. I think that they were talking about some of the heavy jaws from very large masticatory muscles, also the heavy brow ridge, but there hasn't been a Neanderthal skeleton or any parts of a Neanderthal skeleton found. These are just characteristics that look kind of Neanderthal-ish. And that might push the date of entry back, but that's still kind of, we're waiting on more evidence. When you start looking at the questions of when, where, and how, this all depends on sites and site dating. One of the first and oldest sites that we have, actually located up in the northern Yukon. So when you're looking at a map, you start understanding that this site was dated 27,000 years ago, and that image that you see, that's a caribou bone. And usually we find a caribou bone, we say no big deal, but it was carved. It showed some sort of human modification, so therefore it becomes an artifact. And this shows that there were humans here 27,000 years ago, possibly suggesting that they took a much more northerly and then interior route. And so we'll talk about these different routes and what the different theories as to when and where they came in from. But we have to look at these sites, we have to look at this evidence, and ultimately the problem is that we just don't have a lot of archaeology. You have to understand that the environment, the climate was much different, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But this is also a very small, relatively small population making this migration. And so the smaller the population, and they're very nomadic, they leave a small footprint, so to speak, an archaeological footprint. So it's really hard to see them. So the question of where, well, we can most certainly point to this movement from Asia into Siberia, across the Bering Strait. If you see the satellite imagery, you can see the land masses and you can see that kind of greenish yellow there. And that shows a um, relatively low elevation as far as the ocean is concerned. Now, 40,000 years ago, things looked much different. Right now, there is no connecting landmass between Alaska and Asia. But the climate was much different. We were in an ice age. The whole globe was in an ice age. So with glaciation at its maximum, and we call this the last glacial maximum, or the LGM, the Bering Sea was much different. It really wasn't a sea at all. And so you have to imagine, as things are so cold and these ice sheets are so large, the world's ocean levels were very, very low. We're dealing with very low sea levels. Some of these ice sheets, there are two in specific that we're going to be talking about, that covered North America. The one on the east side is called the Laurentide ice sheet, and the one on the west is the Cordilleran ice sheet. And so we have these two ice sheets, and in some parts of the ice sheet, we're talking about 3 miles thick. Now that's crazy. I can't even. It's hard to wrap your mind around how thick these ice sheets were, and they're so thick that we're actually still dealing with the repercussions of this last ice age. The ice was so thick that even today the land is still in what's called glacial rebound, meaning that there was so much weight that it's almost like when you press down on a sponge, or like a Tempur-Pedic mattress or a foam or something like that, and then watch it slowly rise back up. That's what the Earth is still doing. It still rises 2 to 3 centimeters in certain parts. Michigan, for example, the Earth is still rebounding from all that weight on it. And so we're talking about a vastly different environment and climate that people had to adapt to and that people are dealing with. So with this very low sea level, this meant that this relatively low elevation area became exposed. So at glacial maximum, this modern day Bering Strait that only has a depth of 200 feet, this would have all been exposed land, creating a land bridge linking the two continents. And once again, you'll have to excuse me, that last part got kind of cut off, but this land bridge is called Beringia, Beringia. And Beringia is actually, everybody calls it an ice bridge. It wasn't ice. It actually had a very nice temperate kind of climate. And it wasn't a narrow corridor. People think of walking down this ice ice bridge that's miles and miles long and only 5 people across. It actually was about 1,300 miles wide, almost a subcontinent. And so humans had a lot of room to cross. And this mild climate allowed for grasslands and forests to develop. And because of this, this meant all of this new kind of area over thousands of years opened up. We have grasslands, we have forest, and of course this is going to attract all kinds of wildlife: mammoth, bisons, horse, dire wolves, and all of the humans. The natural theory is that the humans then followed the wildlife because they were big game hunters. And in case you didn't miss that, I did say dire wolves. So just to throw that in there. The most commonly accepted theory today is that migrating populations followed big game east across Beringia, and this is plausible because there was indeed a mild and lush environment for animals, very low pressure for humans and animals, so the populations were relatively low, so there wasn't a lot of pressure on the land. They were moving into space that had never been settled before, and there's no competition for food. Um, in today's modern world, it's hard to imagine an area that's not inhabited by people. I can't even imagine coming into a new area and not seeing people around and seeing just lush vegetation, animals, the subsistence that you require is all there for you. And so naturally, this is a great draw for humans and for animals to move across this land bridge into this uninhabited continent. And so ultimately, this is the most plausible theory for this is the why humans did this, behind the question. Once reaching modern day Alaska, the groups moved east and south into North America. Now, this is another cause for controversy. How they did this, when they did this, has been two of the most controversial topics in archaeology. Now, there are three major theories behind the peopling of North America. So for the most part, most people agree that they came from Asia. Most people agree that they came in some capacity across Beringia, across the Bering Strait, that they were following wildlife, that they were moving into uninhabited lands. Those three things are pretty much a given. Once they got to what's now modern day Alaska, where they went from there and when they did this, that's the controversy. So, the first theory that we're going to talk about is called the ice barrier theory. Now, scientists have tried their best by looking at all different types of evidence, trying to figure out when the land bridge would have been exposed the longest. And there are two major times that this land bridge would have been exposed the longest. Because, like anything, the glacial maximum was always in flux. So that the glaciers, if anybody knows anything about glaciers are always moving. The temperature might rise a couple degrees, and the glacier, the average temperature, and the glacier might move back a couple miles. It might get a couple degrees colder, and the glacier moves in a little bit. And so we're talking about something that's in constant flux given the global climate at the time. So between 52,000 and 42,000 years ago, we know that there was a time span of 10,000 years that the land bridge, Beringia, would have been exposed pretty long. And then there was a period between 30,000 to 11,000 years ago that also, this marks this 19,000 years, that also would have been exposed very long. However, and this is kind of the catch-22 behind it all, this means that we're talking about a glacial maximum. So the world is at its coldest, the glaciers are at their largest. And so low sea levels and exposed land also means that the largest ice sheets are blocking access into North America. This also meant very cold conditions with little to no resources. So it's tough because these two periods mark the time when it was best to cross the land bridge. However, once you get to North America, it's also the worst because you have these huge 3-mile tall ice sheets standing in your way. This is a representation of approximately what the Cordilleran and the Laurentide looked like. The researchers argue that there are only certain times that humans could gain access into North America. This is a huge roadblock for humans. And this is when either glaciers were developing or receding, so when they were in that fluctuation period. So researchers have said that there are 4 specific time periods where the glaciers were moving and would open up enough room that humans could get through. And you can see the time periods. Only about 2,000 year time periods. Now, excuse me, I said only 2,000 years. That's a huge, huge amount of time, right? We're dealing with huge, vast time periods. 10,000 years, 2,000 years, 1,000 years. This is a very, very long time for people to move through. However, we're still dealing with very small populations. So, and this is a very hard trek to make. When they did gain access, they moved into the corridor between the Cordilleran and the Laurentide. And you can see here, this is the interior movement coming out into North America, into modern day Canada, modern day United States, coming into the plains, with some groups continuing down into South America. Okay, so this for a long time. This was the most commonly accepted theory, was this ice barrier theory. Now there's another theory, and that is the ice-free corridor theory. This one's a little bit more simpler. This one just says, some argue that an ice-free corridor between the two glaciers always existed, even during glacial maximums. Therefore, migration could have occurred any time during Beringia's exposure. It could have occurred as early as 50,000 years ago, and it could have occurred as late as 11,000 years ago. That's a huge time period. We're talking about 40,000 years of human prehistory. However, there's the evidence. It's much harder to argue this one, because reconstructing glacial movements is a very hard thing to do. So for a long time, it was the competition between these two. Basically, they were always saying that there was an interior route, but they were arguing when. So it wasn't so much the where. They both of these theories, when I say they, I mean the proponents of these theories, both the ice barrier and the ice-free corridor theories, they both say that humans took an interior land route and came out right in the middle of North America. However, there is a third theory, and this one has gained a lot more momentum as archaeology has been done. And this is a coastal route theory. Now, the main proponents of this theory say that people, as soon as they got into North America, immediately turned south, and being experienced boaters and fishermen moved south along the coast. That they already knew their maritime trade. Humans had already adapted very, very well to maritime resources and boating. And although they might not have had the ability to cross an ocean, they very well could island hop. That's how the South Pacific was populated. And so we see that researchers are saying this is a very plausible idea. For the most part, the Pacific coast was ice-free. But the glaciers are always there. And then, as you can see here, you have the ice sheets. And then once you hit so far south that the ice sheets, the glaciers are gone, then they moved inland. Some even say that they just continued to move down the coast because there were plenty of resources. They were well adept at this, all the way down the Pacific coast. The hard part is, now this was a far-fetched concept, and the hard part is that there was no archaeological evidence. And we're going to talk a lot about, especially this theory, when we talk about the first Californians. And so keep this in your head, because since the 1980s, a lot more sites have been found, specifically in California, that make this a much more promising theory. And there have been many more sites that have been found over the past 20 and 30 years that tend to argue against the ice barrier theory and for the coastal route theory. So we're going to get a little bit more into that next time, but just make yourself aware, understand these three different theories of the peopling of North America. We're going to talk about these more. And then for next time, what we're going to be doing, I'm still going to be gone next week, Tuesday, but what you'll have do is a video assignment that will discuss, once again, the peopling of America in more detail. You'll have an assignment sheet, fill out questions, or answer questions, I should say, and that'll be due on the 12th. Check iLearn for the video link. Check iLearn for the assignment paper. It'll be due on the 12th, and so be sure to bring that with you to turn in. And then we'll discuss in more detail who these first Californians were and how they got here, and the archaeology, the evidence that we use to prove this. All right. Thank you guys. Have a nice weekend.